The radio crackled to life at 4:47 a.m., shattering the silence of the observation post. "We've got a situation at Enclosure 7. Sasha's in labor, and the hyena pack broke through the barrier fence." Dr. Elena Martinez bolted upright, her coffee mug clattering to the floor. She'd been the lead wildlife veterinarian at the Redwood Wildlife Conservation Center in Northern California for 8 years, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this exact nightmare scenario. Sasha, their critically endangered Amur tigress, was 2 weeks early, and now surrounded by a clan of spotted hyenas that had somehow breached the supposedly secure perimeter between habitats. "I'm on my way," Elena said into the radio, already grabbing her emergency field kit. "Get Marcus and the DART team to the south entrance. Nobody goes in until I assess the situation. If you enjoyed this opening, subscribe to stay updated on stories that grip you from the first word." The pre-dawn darkness felt heavier than usual as Elena's truck tore down the access road, headlights cutting through the coastal fog that rolled in from the Pacific every morning. Redwood Conservation wasn't just any wildlife facility. It housed some of the world's most endangered species, many of them rescues from illegal trafficking operations or failed breeding programs at underfunded zoos. Sasha had come to them 3 years ago from a roadside attraction in Nevada, malnourished and traumatized, her spirit nearly broken. It had taken 18 months just to get her healthy enough to consider breeding. And now this. Elena could see the emergency lights strobing against the trees as she pulled into the staff lot. Marcus Chen, the facility's operations manager, was already there with the rapid response team, 4 trained handlers in protective gear, each carrying tranquilizer rifles. His face was grim in the harsh artificial light. "How bad?" Elena asked, not slowing her stride toward the observation platform that overlooked Enclosure 7. "Bad. The hyenas dug under the fence line sometime during the night. Maintenance didn't catch it on the midnight rounds. By the time the motion sensors triggered, at least 7 of them were already in Sasha's territory." Marcus handed her the night vision binoculars. "She's in the den box, but they're circling. And Elena, she's already delivered at least 1 cub, maybe 2. Elena pressed the binoculars to her eyes, her heart hammering. The enclosure came into focus in grainy green, and there, maybe 40 yards from the artificial den structure, was the ring of hyenas. Their distinctive sloped backs and powerful jaws were unmistakable even in the low light. They moved with purpose, not the chaotic energy most people associated with them. These were calculated predators, and they'd found vulnerable prey. Inside the den box, partially visible through the entrance, Sasha lay on her side. Even from this distance, Elena could see the exhaustion in the tigress's posture. The pale shape of at least 1 newborn cub was visible near her belly, and she was clearly in the throes of active labor with more to come. Tigers typically gave birth to 2 to 4 cubs. If she was mid-delivery, she was at her most vulnerable. "She can't move," Elena said, her voice tight. "If she tries to defend herself or run, she'll either abandon the cubs she's already delivered or injure them, and she's not done giving birth." "So what do we do?" asked Jake Morrison, one of the senior handlers. He'd been at Redwood longer than anyone except the director. "We can't just dart all the hyenas. By the time they drop, they could attack, and Sasha's too close. If we hit her with a tranq while she's in labor." "She or the cubs could die," Elena finished. "I know." The hyenas were getting bolder. The alpha female, a scarred, battle-hardened matriarch named Sheila by the staff who monitored the hyena enclosure, took 2 deliberate steps closer to the den. Sasha's head lifted, and even without enhanced vision, Elena could hear the low, rumbling growl that carried across the enclosure. It was a warning, but also a sound of desperation. "We need a distraction," Marcus said. "Something to break their focus and draw them away from the den long enough for us to extract Sasha and the cubs." Elena's mind raced through the options. Every second counted. Newborn tiger cubs were born blind, helpless, and unable to regulate their own body temperature. In the February pre-dawn chill, even 20 minutes of exposure could be fatal, and if the hyenas reached them first. "The feeding mechanism," Elena said suddenly. "Enclosure 7 has an automated feeding system on the eastern perimeter, right? The one we use to distribute enrichment meals?" Marcus caught on immediately. We could trigger it remotely, load it with fresh meat. The sound and smell might pull them away. Might isn't good enough, Jake said. It's what we've got, Elena snapped. Then softer. Sorry, but he's right. We need something guaranteed. What if we combine it, trigger the feeder, and then use the perimeter speakers to play hyena vocalizations, feeding calls, make them think there's competition for food? The Redwood facility used audio enrichment regularly, recorded sounds of prey animals, environmental noise, even the calls of the animal's own species to encourage natural behaviors. It was a long shot, but hyenas were intensely social and food-motivated. The combination of sensory triggers might be enough. Do it, Marcus ordered, already pulling out his tablet to access the facility's control systems. Jake, get your team in position at the den access point. The second those hyenas move, you go in fast. Elena, you'll need to make the call on whether Sasha can be moved or if we're delivering the rest of those cubs in the field. I'll need Sarah, Elena said, referring to Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, the center's other veterinarian, and the mobile incubator. If she's delivered 2 and there are more coming, we might have to take the cubs immediately and finish the delivery through intervention. The next 5 minutes were controlled chaos. Sarah arrived with the neonatal equipment, her usually calm demeanor sharp with focus. Marcus synchronized the feeding mechanism and loaded the audio file, a cacophony of hyena whoops, giggles, and feeding frenzy sounds recorded months ago during a behavioral study. The rapid response team moved into position, staying low and downwind. Elena watched through the binoculars, barely breathing. In the enclosure, Sasha let out a low, pained grunt. Another cub was coming. Now, Marcus said, and hit the activation button. The feeding mechanism whirred to life with a mechanical clatter that echoed across the enclosure, dropping a 40-pound load of fresh venison into the feeding pit 200 yards from the den. Simultaneously, the speakers erupted with the recorded hyena calls, urgent, excited, competitive. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then Sheila's head snapped toward the sound, her ears pricked forward. Another hyena, a younger male, took an uncertain step away from the den circle. The audio intensified, the whooping calls reaching a fever pitch that spoke of food and rivals and everything that drove hyena behavior. Sheila broke first, loping toward the feeding area with surprising speed. Like dominoes, the rest of the clan followed, 7 hyenas streaming away from the den, their attention completely redirected. Go, Marcus shouted into his radio. The response team moved. Jake led the sprint across the enclosure, covering the distance to the den in under 30 seconds. Elena and Sarah were right behind them, medical bags bouncing against their shoulders. Elena's lungs burned, but she didn't slow. They reached the den box just as Sasha's head lifted again. The Tigress's amber eyes locked onto Elena, and there was recognition there. Trust. Hard-won over 3 years of patient care, but also fear and fierce maternal instinct. Easy, girl, Elena murmured, setting down her kit. We're here to help. Inside the den, 2 tiny cubs lay nestled against Sasha's belly, their wet fur already beginning to dry. They were barely bigger than Elena's hand, their eyes sealed shut, tiny mouths working blindly. And Sasha's body was contracting again. At least 1 more cub was coming, maybe 2. We've got maybe 3 minutes before those hyenas figure out the ruse, Jake said, his rifle trained on the distant figures near the feeding area. What's the call, Doc? Elena made the decision in a heartbeat. We move her. All of them. Sarah, prep the transport carrier. Jake, I need 2 of your team to help lift, gently. Sasha's going to fight us, but we don't have a choice. The Tigress growled as they approached, a deep rumble that vibrated through Elena's chest. But she didn't strike. Somewhere in her exhausted, pain-fogged mind, Sasha seemed to understand that these humans weren't the threat. The threat was out there, circling back. Sarah worked with practiced efficiency, lining the large transport carrier with heated blankets and setting up the portable incubator for the newborns. I've got the cubs, she said, her voice steady despite the urgency. You focus on Mama. Elena nodded, pulling on sterile gloves. She gently touched Sasha's flank, feeling the powerful muscles tense beneath her palm. Another contraction rippled through the tigress's body. "One more coming for sure," Elena confirmed. "Maybe another after that. Sasha, we're going to get you somewhere safe." The two handlers moved in carefully, positioning the carrier as close to the den entrance as possible. In the distance, the hyena vocalizations continued to play, but Elena could see the clan beginning to lose interest. Sheila had already lifted her head from the meat pile, sniffing the air. They had maybe 90 seconds. "On 3, Jake said. 1, 2. They lifted together, supporting Sasha's weight as they guided her toward the carrier. The tigress resisted for a moment, her head turning back toward her cubs, a plaintive sound escaping her throat that Elena had never heard before. Pure maternal distress. "Sarah, the cubs now!" Elena called. Sarah scooped up both newborns with the skill of someone who'd done this 100 times, cradling them against her chest as she moved toward the incubator. They were so small, so fragile. Their tiny paws paddled weakly at the air, and their mouths opened in silent mews that would have been inaudible even without the chaos around them. Sasha saw her babies being taken and lunged, nearly breaking free from the handler's grip. Her claws extended, raking across the metal edge of the carrier with a screech that set Elena's teeth on edge. "I know, girl, I know," Elena said, positioning herself where Sasha could see her. "They're safe. I promise you they're safe. But we need to move." Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and Sasha's legs buckled. The handlers used the moment to guide her fully into the carrier, and Elena slid in beside her, her emergency kit clutched in one hand. There was no time for the medical facility. She was going to have to deliver the remaining cubs here, in transit, in a moving carrier with a 300-pound tigress in active labor. "Close it up and move!" Marcus's voice crackled over the radio. "Hyenas are coming back." The carrier door sealed with a heavy clang. Through the ventilation slats, Elena could see Jake and his team forming a defensive line, rifles raised. The vehicle lurched into motion, and Elena braced herself against the carrier wall, her other hand on Sasha's heaving side. The tigress's breathing was labored, her tongue lolling. Elena could see the next cub beginning to crown. "Come on, Sasha. You can do this. You're so strong." The carrier bounced over uneven ground, and Elena heard the sharp crack of a tranquilizer rifle firing outside. Once, twice. Someone shouted. The vehicle accelerated. But inside this metal box, the world narrowed to just Elena and Sasha, and the life struggling to enter it. "I can see the cub," Elena said, mostly to herself. She positioned her hands carefully, ready to assist if needed. Tiger births were usually straightforward. The mothers were built for this, but stress and interruption could cause complications. "Almost there, girl. Almost there." Sasha let out a guttural sound, her whole body straining, and then the third cub slid free into Elena's waiting hands. It was larger than the first two, a male, his tiny body slick with amniotic fluid. Elena cleared his airways quickly, stimulating his breathing with firm but gentle strokes. For a terrifying moment, he didn't respond. Then his small chest expanded, and he let out a weak but definite cry. "That's it," Elena breathed. "That's it, little one." She placed him on the heated blanket beside Sasha's belly, and the tigress immediately turned her head, sniffing him, her rough tongue rasping across his tiny body in instinctive grooming. The bond was instant, primal. Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion she didn't have time for. The carrier came to a stop. They'd reached the medical facility, a reinforced building at the center of the conservation grounds, equipped with everything they needed for emergency veterinary care. The door opened, and Marcus appeared, his face flushed. "We got 3 of them with darts. The others retreated. Everyone's accounted for." His eyes dropped to the newborn cub. "Is that number 3?" Elena confirmed. "And I think there's one more coming." They transferred Sasha to the facility's large animal surgical suite, a space designed specifically for situations like this. Sarah had already set up the incubator with the first 2 cubs, their tiny forms barely visible beneath the warming lights. They were moving, which was a good sign, their little mouths seeking food they wouldn't be able to consume for hours yet. Elena stayed with Sasha, monitoring her vitals while the tigress rested between contractions. The danger had passed, but the stress of the interrupted labor concerned her. Sometimes, in cases of extreme trauma, the mother's body could stall, refusing to deliver the remaining offspring. If that happened, they'd need to perform an emergency C-section, and Sasha was already exhausted. "Come on, Mama," Elena murmured, stroking the tigress's head. Sasha's eyes were half closed, her breathing steadier now that she was in a safe, quiet environment. "One more. I know you're tired, but your baby needs you to finish this." 20 minutes passed, then 30. Sarah checked the first 3 cubs, all stable, all showing good reflexes and body temperature. Marcus coordinated with the maintenance team to investigate how the hyenas had breached the barrier and to ensure it wouldn't happen again. Jake filed an incident report. The sun began to rise outside, pale light filtering through the high windows of the medical facility. And then, at 6:23 a.m., Sasha's body tensed again. "Here we go," Elena said, moving into position. This contraction was different, longer, harder. Sasha vocalized, a sound that was part growl, part cry. Elena could see the 4th cub, but something was wrong. The position wasn't right. The cub was breech. "Sarah, I need you," Elena called, her voice sharp with urgency. Sarah was there in seconds, assessing the situation with a glance. "Breech presentation. Do we have time to reposition?" Elena's hands were already moving, feeling for the cub's position through Sasha's contractions. The tigress growled, her muscles rigid with pain and effort. "We have to try. If she delivers like this, the cub could suffocate or she could hemorrhage." It was a delicate, dangerous procedure, reaching in to manually reposition a cub while the mother was in active labor. One wrong move, and Sasha could panic and injure herself or Elena. But the alternative was worse. "Sasha, I need you to trust me one more time," Elena said softly. She administered a mild sedative, just enough to take the edge off the tigress's panic response without stopping the labor. Then, with Sarah monitoring Sasha's vitals and talking in a low, soothing voice, Elena began the repositioning. Her hands worked by feel and instinct, guided by years of training and experience. She could feel the cub's tiny body, the curve of its spine, the position of its legs. Slowly, carefully, she coaxed it into the correct position. Sasha's breathing hitched, her claws flexing against the padded table, but she didn't fight. "Almost there," Elena whispered. "Almost. Got it." The cub shifted, and suddenly everything aligned. Elena withdrew her hands, and Sasha's body took over, the natural rhythm of labor resuming. One more powerful contraction, and the 4th cub emerged, smaller than the others, a female, her fur a shade lighter. But she wasn't breathing. Elena's training kicked in instantly. She cleared the cub's airways, her fingers working with desperate precision. She stimulated the tiny chest, rubbing firmly, willing life into the small body. Sarah handed her a pediatric ambu bag, and Elena delivered several gentle breaths. Nothing. "Come on," Elena said through gritted teeth. "Come on, baby. Breathe." She continued the resuscitation, her own heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. 30 seconds. 45. Sarah's hand touched her shoulder, a gentle warning. They both knew that after a certain point, even if they revived the cub, there could be brain damage from oxygen deprivation. But Elena couldn't stop. Not yet. She delivered another breath, followed by more chest compressions, her movements rhythmic and precise. And then, a flutter, the tiniest movement of the cub's ribcage. Elena held her breath. Another flutter, stronger this time. And then the cub gasped, a small wet sound, and her lungs inflated. "Yes," Sarah breathed. "Yes, Elena, you did it." The cub began to breathe on her own, shallow and irregular at first, but growing stronger with each passing second. Elena placed her beside her siblings in the incubator, her hands shaking with adrenaline and relief. 4 cubs, all alive, against impossible odds. Sasha lifted her head, her eyes finding the incubator where her babies lay. She made a soft chuffing sound, a vocalization Elena had read about but never heard in person. It was the sound a mother tiger made to call her cubs. "They're okay," Elena told her, tears she hadn't realized she was crying sliding down her cheeks. "They're all okay. You did it, Sasha. You're a mother." The first 72 hours were critical. Elena barely left the medical facility, surviving on coffee and the protein bars Sarah kept forcing into her hands. The 4 cubs, 2 males and 2 females, remained in the incubator under constant monitoring, their tiny bodies fighting to adapt to a world they'd entered under the worst possible circumstances. Sasha recovered in the adjacent recovery suite, separated from her cubs by necessity but close enough to hear and smell them. The separation was agonizing for both mother and babies, but standard protocol. They needed to ensure Sasha was stable, free from infection, and producing adequate milk before attempting reunification. Every 6 hours, Elena would bring one of the cubs to Sasha for supervised nursing, rotating through all 4 to ensure each got the antibody-rich colostrum they desperately needed. On the second day, Marcus appeared in the doorway of the observation room where Elena sat watching the incubator monitors. His expression was troubled. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "Director Castellanos wants to see you, now." Elena's stomach dropped. Director Robert Castellanos ran Redwood Conservation with an iron fist and a tight budget. He was a brilliant administrator and a passionate conservationist, but he was also ruthlessly practical. She had a sinking feeling she knew what this meeting was about. His office was in the main administrative building, a converted ranger station that overlooked the entire facility. When Elena entered, Castellanos was standing at the window, his back to her. He was a tall man in his early 60s, his hair more silver than black now, his shoulders carrying the weight of 100 impossible decisions. "Sit," he said without turning around. Elena sat, her exhaustion making her bones feel heavy. Castellanos finally turned to face her. 4 cubs. Miracle birth. You and Dr. Okonkwo performed brilliantly under impossible circumstances. The entire staff is calling it the rescue of the decade. "But," Elena said, because she could hear it coming, "but we can't afford them." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Redwood operates on a shoestring budget even in good years. We're already over capacity. We're housing 37 endangered animals across 12 species, and our annual funding barely covers operational costs." Castellanos sat down heavily in his chair. 4 Amur tiger cubs require specialized care, specialized diet, and eventually, specialized housing. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next 2 years alone. "They're critically endangered," Elena said, her voice rising despite her effort to stay calm. "There are fewer than 600 Amur tigers left in the wild. Every single cub matters. These 4 could be the difference between survival and extinction for their subspecies." "I know that. Don't you think I know that?" Castellanos rubbed his face with both hands. "But I also know that if we bankrupt this facility trying to raise 4 cubs, we lose everything. All 37 animals, every conservation program we run, the education outreach that brings in 50,000 students a year, all of it." Elena felt like she'd been punched in the chest. "So what are you proposing?" "We keep 2. We transfer 2 to other facilities that have the resources and the breeding program capacity to take them." He pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. "I've already been in contact with the San Diego Zoo and the Bronx Zoo. Both have expressed interest. Both have excellent Amur tiger programs. The cubs would have good lives, and they'd contribute to the genetic diversity of the captive population." Elena opened the folder with trembling hands. The documentation was already prepared. Transfer agreements, transport logistics, veterinary protocols. Castellanos had been planning this before he even called her in. The decision, in his mind, was already made. "Which 2?" Elena asked quietly. "That's your call. You're the one who brought them into this world. You choose which ones stay and which ones go." The cruelty of it took her breath away. Not intentional cruelty. Castellanos wasn't a cruel man, but the cruelty of impossible circumstances and limited resources. She thought of the 4 tiny lives in the incubator, fighting so hard to survive. How could she possibly choose? "I need time," she said. "You have 48 hours." The zoos need an answer, and the cubs need to be at least a week old before they can travel. Castellanos' expression softened slightly. Elena, I'm sorry, if there was any other way. But there isn't, Elena finished. She stood, the folder clutched in her hands. I'll give you my decision in 2 days. She walked out of the office in a daze, barely seeing where she was going. Her feet carried her back to the medical facility on autopilot. Sarah was there, checking the cub's weight gain and recording data on her tablet. She took one look at Elena's face and set the tablet down. What happened? Elena told her everything. By the end, Sarah's expression had gone from concerned to furious. He can't do this. There has to be another way. Fundraising, grants, emergency appeals. Do you think he hasn't thought of that? Elena slumped into a chair. He's right, Sarah. We're barely keeping the lights on as it is. The last grant application we submitted was rejected. Our donor base is aging out. And raising 4 tiger cubs to adulthood? The costs are astronomical. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the incubator where the 4 cubs slept in a pile of striped fur and tiny paws. So we have to choose. We have to decide which of Sasha's babies get to stay with their mother and which ones get shipped across the country to strangers. I don't know how to make that choice, Elena admitted. Her voice cracked. They're all perfect. They're all fighters. How do I look at them and decide which ones are worth less? You don't, said a voice from the doorway. Both women turned. Marcus stood there, and behind him was Jake Morrison. The handler's weathered face was set in determined lines. You don't choose, Marcus repeated, stepping into the room. Because we're going to find another way. There is no other way, Elena said. The money doesn't exist. Then we create it. Jake moved to the incubator, looking down at the sleeping cubs. That rescue 2 days ago. I've been in wildlife conservation for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like it. A tigress giving birth surrounded by hyenas, and we got her and all 4 cubs out alive. That's not just a good story, Elena. That's a miracle story. That's the kind of story that gets attention. Marcus nodded, pulling out his phone. Jake's right. We've been so focused on the medical crisis that we haven't thought about the public relations opportunity. This story could go viral. National news, social media, the works. And with that attention comes donations. We've tried publicity campaigns before, Sarah said, but Elena could hear the hope creeping into her voice. They never raise enough. Because they were generic. Help save endangered animals doesn't grab people the way a specific dramatic story does. Jake gestured at the cubs. But help us keep Sasha's miracle babies together. That's personal. That's emotional. People will respond to that. Elena's mind was racing. It was a long shot. But it was a shot. We'd need professional help. A real media campaign, not just a Facebook post and a GoFundMe link. We'd need video, photography, press releases, social media strategy. My sister works in PR for a nonprofit in San Francisco, Marcus said. She owes me a favor, a big one. I bet I could get her to help us, maybe even pro bono if we can't afford her rates. And I know a wildlife videographer who's done work for National Geographic, Sarah added, her excitement building. He's local, and he's passionate about conservation. If we could get him in here to film the cubs, Sasha, the whole story. For the first time since leaving Castellanos' office, Elena felt a flicker of hope. It was fragile, easily crushed, but it was there. We'd have to move fast. Castellanos gave me 48 hours to decide, which means we have maybe a week before those transfer agreements become binding. Then we start now, Marcus said. Tonight, I'll call my sister. Sarah, you reach out to your videographer friend. Jake, we need testimonials from the staff, everyone who was part of the rescue. Personal accounts, emotional impact, the whole 9 yards. What do you need me to do? Elena asked. Marcus met her eyes. You need to go back to Castellanos and buy us more time. Tell him we're launching an emergency fundraising campaign. Tell him we need 2 weeks, minimum, to see if we can raise the money to keep all 4 cubs. He's a conservationist at heart. He doesn't want to split them up any more than we do. If there's even a chance we can make this work, he'll give us the time. Elena looked at the incubator, at the 4 tiny lives depending on decisions made by humans in offices and conference rooms. She thought about Sasha, recovering in the next room, her body still healing from the trauma of that terrible morning. The Tigress had fought so hard to bring these cubs into the world. The least Elena could do was fight just as hard to keep them together. "Okay," she said. "Let's do this. Let's save them all." The next 18 hours were a blur of activity. Marcus's sister Carmen turned out to be a powerhouse, a senior PR director at a major environmental nonprofit with connections throughout the media landscape. When Marcus explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. Within 3 hours, she'd assembled a volunteer team and was on a video call with Elena, Sarah, and Marcus, mapping out a comprehensive campaign strategy. "We're calling it Sasha's Miracle," Carmen said, her energy infectious even through a computer screen. "The hook is the dramatic rescue, but the heart is keeping the family together. We need compelling visuals, a clear funding goal, and a tight timeline to create urgency." Sarah's videographer friend, a soft-spoken man named David Chen, arrived at dawn the next morning with professional camera equipment and a genuine reverence for the work being done at Redwood. He spent hours filming the cubs, capturing their tiny movements, their first attempts at vocalizations, the way they instinctively huddled together for warmth and comfort. But the most powerful footage came when they finally allowed Sasha into the same space as all 4 cubs together for the first time. The reunification happened on the 5th day after the birth, in a specially prepared room adjacent to the medical facility. Elena had consulted with 3 other tiger specialists and reviewed dozens of case studies before making the decision. Sasha was healthy, her milk production was strong, and the cubs were all gaining weight steadily. It was time. David positioned his cameras discreetly in the corners of the room, their red recording lights barely visible in the dim lighting designed to mimic a natural den environment. Elena, Sarah, and Marcus watched from behind the observation glass as Jake carefully carried the incubator into the room and set it down near the padded platform where Sasha waited. The Tigress had been pacing for the past hour, her agitation clear. She knew her babies were close. She could smell them, hear their tiny mews, but she couldn't reach them. Now, as the incubator door opened and Jake gently lifted out the first cub, Sasha went completely still. Jake placed the cub, the largest male, on the platform and stepped back quickly. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Sasha moved forward, her massive head lowering to sniff the tiny creature. Her tongue emerged, rasping across the cub's fur in long, deliberate strokes. The cub squeaked, his little paws paddling in the air, and Sasha made that soft chuffing sound again. The mother's call. "She remembers him," Sarah whispered, tears already streaming down her face. After 5 days of separation, she remembers her baby. Jake brought out the second cub, then the third, then the fourth, placing each one carefully on the platform. Sasha examined each in turn, her movements gentle despite her size and power. She nudged them with her nose, grooming them thoroughly, learning their individual scents. The cubs, operating on pure instinct, began crawling toward her warmth, their tiny mouths seeking food. Within minutes, all 4 were nursing, their small bodies pressed against Sasha's belly. The Tigress lay on her side, her eyes half closed in contentment, one massive paw curved protectively around her babies. It was a scene of such primal beauty that everyone watching felt the weight of it. This was why they did this work, why they fought against impossible odds and inadequate funding and the slow march toward extinction. David's camera captured every moment. "That's our centerpiece," Carmen said over the video call later that evening, watching the footage David had sent. "That image of Sasha with all 4 cubs nursing, that's what's going to make people open their wallets. But we need context. Elena, I need you to do an on-camera interview. Tell the story of the rescue, explain what's at stake, make it personal." Elena hated being on camera, but she understood the necessity. The next morning, she sat in front of David's equipment and told the story, the pre-dawn emergency call, the hyenas circling, the desperate race to save Sasha and her cubs, the breech birth, the cub who wouldn't breathe. She explained the financial reality, the impossible choice Castellanos had given her, and why keeping the family together mattered not just for these 4 cubs, but for the survival of their entire subspecies. "Amur tigers are ghosts," she said, looking directly into the camera. "There are so few left that some scientists believe they're functionally extinct. Too few to maintain genetic diversity. Too scattered to form viable breeding populations. Every cub born in captivity is a genetic lifeline, a chance to preserve what we're losing in the wild. But more than that, these cubs are individuals. They're Sasha's children. She fought for them. She trusted us to help her bring them safely into this world. And now we're asking for your help to keep them together, to give them the chance to grow up as a family, the way nature intended." Carmen worked her media contacts relentlessly. By the afternoon of the 2nd day, the story had been picked up by a regional news station. By the evening, it was on the national news. By the next morning, it had gone viral. The video of Sasha nursing her 4 cubs had been viewed over 2 million times. The hashtag #Sasha's Miracle was trending on social media. News outlets from CNN to the BBC were requesting interviews, and the donations started pouring in. Elena watched the fundraising counter on their campaign website climb with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. $5,000, $10,000, $25,000. The goal Carmen had set was ambitious. $350,000 to cover the estimated costs of raising all 4 cubs to adulthood, including expanded enclosure construction, specialized diet, veterinary care, and a contingency fund for emergencies. "We're at $42,000, Marcus reported on the 3rd day of the campaign. "That's more than we've raised in the past 6 months combined, but we're still nowhere near the goal." "It's only been 3 days, Carmen said on their daily strategy call. "Viral campaigns have a life cycle. We're in the exponential growth phase. Trust the process." But Elena could see the doubt in Marcus's eyes, the same doubt she felt gnawing at her own hope. $42,000 was incredible, but it was a fraction of what they needed, and Castellanos' deadline was approaching. She'd bought them 2 weeks, but that time was evaporating fast. On the 6th day, something unexpected happened. A celebrity wildlife advocate with 15 million social media followers shared their video with a personal endorsement. The campaign exploded. The donation counter began climbing so fast that the website crashed twice. Carmen's team worked around the clock to handle the media requests, the interview offers, the sudden flood of attention. $100,000. $150,000. $200,000. Elena was in the medical facility conducting the cubs' daily health check when her phone rang. It was Castellanos. "Come to my office," he said. His tone was unreadable. Elena's heart sank. She handed the cub she'd been examining, the smallest female, the one she'd resuscitated, to Sarah, and made the long walk to the administrative building. When she entered Castellanos' office, she found him at his computer, staring at the fundraising page. $237,000, he said without preamble. "In less than a week. Do you have any idea how unprecedented this is?" "Is it enough?" Elena asked, afraid to hope. Castellanos leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely emotional. "It's enough to keep all 4 cubs. It's enough to build the expanded enclosure. It's enough to fund their care for the next 2 years, with money left over for other programs." He shook his head slowly. "Elena, you didn't just save 4 tiger cubs. You might have saved this entire facility." The relief hit her like a physical force. Her knees went weak, and she had to grab the back of a chair to steady herself. "So we can tell the zoos we're keeping them? All 4? "All 4, Castellanos confirmed. "I've already sent the emails. The cubs stay with their mother. The family stays together." He stood and extended his hand. "You did good work, Dr. Martinez. Exceptional work." Elena shook his hand, barely able to process what she was hearing. They'd done it. Against all odds. Against financial reality and institutional limitations and the cruel mathematics of conservation in an underfunded world. They'd actually done it. She walked back to the medical facility in a daze. Sarah was waiting at the door, her expression anxious. "Well?" "They're staying," Elena said, and then she was crying, and Sarah was crying, and they were hugging each other and laughing through their tears. Marcus appeared from somewhere, and Jake, and soon half the staff had gathered, all of them celebrating this impossible victory. That evening, Elena sat in the observation room watching Sasha and her 4 cubs through the glass. The cubs were 9 days old now, their eyes still closed, but their movements stronger, more coordinated. They climbed over each other, squeaking and pawing, while Sasha watched with patient tolerance. When one of them, the adventurous larger male, tried to wander too far, Sasha gently scooped him back with one massive paw. "We need to name them," Sarah said, settling into the chair beside Elena. "They can't just be the cubs forever." Elena had been thinking about this. In the wild, tiger cubs didn't have names, but these weren't wild tigers. They were ambassadors for their species, living symbols of what could be saved if humans chose to care. Their names would be part of their story. "The big male," Elena said, pointing to the adventurous one. "He's bold, always pushing boundaries. Let's call him Ranger." "I like it," Sarah said. "What about his brother?" The second male was calmer, more observant. He watched his siblings play before joining in, as if studying their techniques. "Scout," Elena decided. "He's always watching, learning." The larger female was the most vocal of the 4, always making her presence known. "She's got opinions." Sarah laughed as the cub squeaked indignantly when Scout accidentally rolled over her. "How about Arya?" "Perfect." Elena's eyes moved to the smallest cub, the one who'd come into the world not breathing, the one she'd fought so hard to save. This little female was a fighter, a survivor against impossible odds. And her. Let's call her Hope. "Hope," Sarah repeated softly. "Yeah, that's exactly right." The campaign continued to gain momentum. By the end of the second week, they'd raised over $400,000, exceeding their goal and providing a financial cushion that would allow Redwood to expand other programs as well. Carmen leveraged the attention to secure corporate sponsorships and recurring donor commitments. Media outlets around the world had covered the story. Sasha's miracle had become more than a fundraising campaign. It had become a cultural moment, a rare piece of good news in a world that often felt short on hope. But with the attention came complications Elena hadn't anticipated. The first warning sign came in the form of an email that arrived 3 weeks after the cub's birth. Elena was in her office, catching up on the mountain of paperwork that had accumulated during the crisis when the notification popped up on her screen. The sender was listed as Damon Kruger, Wildlife Acquisition Specialist. The message was brief and professional, but its content made Elena's blood run cold. "Dr. Martinez, I represent a private collector interested in acquiring one or more of the Amur tiger cubs recently born at your facility. My client is prepared to offer substantial compensation, well above market value, and can provide world-class care and housing. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss terms." Elena read it 3 times, her anger building with each pass. She forwarded it immediately to Castellanos and Marcus, then called Carmen. "We've got a problem," she said without preamble, and explained the email. Carmen was quiet for a moment. "I was afraid of this. High-profile animal stories always attract this element. Private collectors, exotic pet traders, people who see dollar signs instead of living creatures. You need to shut this down publicly and immediately." "How?" "Statement on your website and social media. Make it crystal clear that the cubs are not for sale, not now, not ever. That they're part of a conservation program and will remain at Redwood for their entire lives. Be firm, be unambiguous, and don't engage with anyone who contacts you about purchasing them." Elena drafted the statement that afternoon, and Castellanos approved it within the hour. But the email from Kruger was just the first. Over the next week, they received 17 more inquiries, some polite, some aggressive, one that was thinly veiled threat about regulatory compliance issues that could be made to disappear for the right price. "This is insane," Sarah said, reading through the latest batch. "These people think they can just buy endangered animals like they're ordering furniture online." "Some of them probably can," Marcus said grimly. "The exotic animal trade is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and enforcement is spotty at best. There are private collectors out there with facilities that rival professional zoos, and they have the money and lawyers to navigate around most regulations. Elena felt sick. They'd fought so hard to keep the cubs together, to give them a chance at a good life, and now they had to worry about someone trying to steal or purchase them out from under them. Security at Redwood was increased. Additional cameras were installed around the tiger enclosure. Background checks were run on all volunteers and new staff. Jake and his team implemented new protocols for visitor access and monitoring. The facility, which had always operated with a relatively open educational atmosphere, began to feel like a fortress. The cubs, oblivious to the human drama swirling around them, continued to grow and develop. At 4 weeks old, their eyes opened. First Rangers, then Scouts and Arias, and finally Hopes. Elena was there for each moment, watching as they blinked in confusion at the suddenly visible world, their tiny faces scrunching up as they tried to make sense of light and shape and movement. Sasha was a devoted mother, patient and protective. She taught them by example how to groom themselves, how to play fight without causing real harm, how to respond to her vocalizations. When Ranger got too rough with Hope during a wrestling match, Sasha intervened with a gentle but firm correction, pinning him down with one paw until he submitted. When Arya wandered too close to the enclosure door during a feeding, Sasha was there instantly, herding her daughter back to safety. David Chen continued to document their development, and Carmen used the footage to maintain public engagement with the story. The updates were wildly popular. Videos of the cubs taking their first wobbly steps, playing with enrichment toys, or simply sleeping in a pile of striped fur regularly garnered hundreds of thousands of views. But the attention that had saved them was also making them targets. 2 months after the birth, Elena arrived at work to find Castellanos, Marcus, and 3 people she didn't recognize waiting in the conference room. One was a woman in a Federal Wildlife Service uniform. The other 2 were in suits, lawyers. Elena guessed immediately. "Dr. Martinez, please sit down," Castellanos said. His expression was carefully neutral, which Elena had learned meant trouble. "This is Agent Patricia Reeves from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and these are attorneys representing the service. They have some concerns about the cubs." Elena sat, her stomach knotting. "What kind of concerns?" Agent Reeves opened a folder. "Dr. Martinez, we've been reviewing the circumstances surrounding the birth and retention of the 4 Amur tiger cubs currently in your care. While we appreciate the conservation work being done at this facility, we have questions about the decision to keep all 4 cubs rather than transferring them to facilities with established breeding programs." "We have an established breeding program," Elena said, keeping her voice level. "Sasha was part of it. These cubs are part of it. Redwood Conservation has never successfully raised tiger cubs to breeding age," one of the lawyers said. "You have no track record in this area. The San Diego Zoo and the Bronx Zoo both have decades of experience and success with Amur tiger breeding programs. From a conservation standpoint, transferring at least 2 of the cubs to those facilities would maximize their genetic contribution to the species." Elena felt like she'd been slapped. "We raised the money to keep them. The public supported our decision. These cubs are thriving under their mother's care in a stable environment. Separating them now would be traumatic and unnecessary. The public's emotional response doesn't supersede scientific best practices for species conservation," the second lawyer said. "The Fish and Wildlife Service has the authority to mandate transfers if it's determined to be in the best interest of the species." "This is ridiculous," Marcus interjected. "You're telling me that after everything we've been through after the rescue, the fundraising, the public support, you're going to come in here and take these cubs away?" "No one is taking anything away," Agent Reeves said, though her tone suggested that was exactly what might happen. "We're conducting a review. We need to assess the facility's capacity to provide appropriate long-term care, your breeding program protocols, and your plans for the cubs' future. If everything is in order, there's no issue." "And if you decide it's not in order?" Elena asked. "Then we'll work with you to develop a plan that serves the best interests of the species," Agent Reeves said, "which may include transfers to other facilities." The meeting lasted another hour, with the federal representatives asking detailed questions about enclosure specifications, veterinary protocols, enrichment programs, and long-term breeding plans. Elena answered as thoroughly as she could, but she could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. This wasn't about animal welfare or conservation science. This was about bureaucracy and institutional politics, and the fact that Redwood was a small facility that had dared to challenge the established order. When the federal team finally left, promising to return for a full facility inspection in 2 weeks, Elena slumped in her chair. "They're going to take them," she said. "Aren't they?" Castellanos was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Maybe. The federal government has broad authority when it comes to endangered species. If they decide that transferring the cubs is in the best interest of the species, we might not have legal grounds to fight it. After everything," Sarah's voice was shaking with anger, "after we saved them, raised the money, kept them alive against impossible odds, they're just going to come in and take them because we're not a big enough name." "We need to fight this," Marcus said, publicly. "The same way we won the first battle. Get Carmen on the phone, get the media involved, make this a story about government overreach and bureaucratic bullying. Or," Castellanos said slowly, "we could use the next 2 weeks to make absolutely certain that when they come back for that inspection, they can't find a single thing wrong. We document everything. We exceed every standard. We bring in outside experts to validate our protocols. We make it impossible for them to justify a transfer." Elena looked at him. "Can we do that? In 2 weeks?" "We don't have a choice," Castellanos said. "We do it or we lose them." The next 14 days were the most intense of Elena's career. She brought in Dr. Richard Voss, one of the world's leading experts on tiger husbandry, to review every aspect of their care protocols. She worked with Marcus to document every detail of the enclosure design, the enrichment program, the veterinary care schedule. She compiled genetic analysis reports, health records, developmental milestone assessments, and behavioral observations. Sarah coordinated with other facilities to gather comparative data, building a case that the cubs' development at Redwood was meeting or exceeding industry standards. Jake and his team worked overtime to ensure the physical facility was pristine, every safety protocol documented and verified. Carmen, meanwhile, prepared a media strategy in case things went badly. She had press releases ready, interviews scheduled, and a social media campaign prepared to launch at a moment's notice. But everyone agreed. They'd only go public if the federal review went against them. Better to win quietly than to turn this into a war. The cubs, now 10 weeks old, were becoming more active and playful. They chased each other around the enclosure, pounced on Sasha's twitching tail, and wrestled with increasing coordination and strength. Hope, the smallest, had proven to be the most agile, able to climb higher and faster than her siblings. Ranger remained the boldest, always the first to investigate new enrichment items or unfamiliar sounds. Scout was the thinker, watching and learning before acting, and Arya was the most vocal, her squeaks and chuffs a constant soundtrack to their play. Watching them, Elena felt a fierce protectiveness that went beyond professional responsibility. These weren't just endangered animals in her care. They were individuals she'd helped bring into the world, whose first breath she'd fought for, whose mother had trusted her in the most vulnerable moment of her life. She couldn't let them be taken away. The morning of the federal inspection, Elena arrived at Redwood before dawn. She'd barely slept, running through mental checklists and worst-case scenarios. The facility had never looked better, every enclosure spotless, every document organized, every staff member briefed and ready. Agent Reeves arrived at 8 o'clock sharp with a team of 4 specialists, a veterinarian, an animal behaviorist, a facilities engineer, and a geneticist. They carried clipboards, cameras, and measuring equipment. Their expressions were professionally neutral, revealing nothing. "We'll be conducting a comprehensive assessment," Agent Reeves announced. "This will take most of the day. Please provide full access to all areas of the facility, all records, and all staff involved in the care of the tiger cubs." For the next 7 hours, Elena and her team were put through the most thorough examination imaginable. The federal veterinarian spent 90 minutes reviewing the cubs' medical records, questioning every medication dosage, every vaccination schedule, every developmental milestone. The behaviorist observed Sasha and the cubs for 2 hours, taking notes on their interactions, their play patterns, their responses to stimuli. The facilities engineer measured every dimension of the enclosure, tested the water quality, examined the structural integrity of the barriers, and reviewed the emergency protocols. The geneticist wanted to discuss breeding plans, genetic diversity management, and long-term population sustainability. Dr. Voss, who had agreed to be present for the inspection, fielded many of the technical questions with the calm authority of someone who'd spent 40 years in the field. His presence was invaluable. When the federal veterinarian questioned Elena's decision to perform the breech repositioning rather than an emergency C-section, Voss backed her up with citations from peer-reviewed literature and his own extensive experience. Dr. Martinez made the correct call under extremely difficult circumstances, Voss said firmly. The manual repositioning had a higher success rate and lower risk profile than surgical intervention given the specific presentation and the mother's stress levels. Any competent wildlife veterinarian would have made the same choice. By mid-afternoon, Elena's nerves were frayed to breaking. The federal team gave nothing away, no smiles, no frowns, no indication of whether they were impressed or finding fault. They simply moved through their checklist with mechanical efficiency. At 4 o'clock, they gathered in the conference room for what Agent Reeves called preliminary findings. Elena, Castellanos, Marcus, and Sarah sat on one side of the table. The federal team sat on the other. The tension was suffocating. Agent Reeves opened her folder and looked directly at Elena. Dr. Martinez, I'm going to be frank with you. When we initiated this review, there were concerns within the service that Redwood Conservation lacked the infrastructure and expertise to properly care for 4 Amur tiger cubs long-term. There was significant pressure to recommend transfers to larger, more established facilities. Elena's heart sank. Here it came, the bureaucratic justification for taking the cubs away. However, Agent Reeves continued, and Elena's breath caught. After today's inspection, those concerns have been largely alleviated. Your facility meets or exceeds federal standards in every measurable category. Your veterinary care is exemplary. Your enrichment program is innovative and well documented. And most importantly, the cubs are thriving under their mother's care in a stable, secure environment. Elena couldn't breathe. Was this actually happening? The federal veterinarian spoke up. I've reviewed the medical records for all 4 cubs. Their weight gain, developmental milestones, and overall health indicators are excellent. The decision to keep them with their mother rather than hand-raising them was absolutely the right call from a behavioral and psychological standpoint. And Dr. Martinez's handling of the breech birth was textbook. She saved that cub's life. The enclosure design is sound, the facilities engineer added. The expansion plans you've submitted for when the cubs reach adolescence are appropriate and well conceived. With the funding you've secured, you'll be able to provide adequate space and enrichment for all 4 animals as they mature. The geneticist was the last to speak. From a conservation genetics standpoint, keeping the cubs together at one facility isn't ideal for maximizing genetic diversity across the captive population. However, the public engagement and fundraising success of this case has brought unprecedented attention and resources to Amur tiger conservation. The intangible benefits, public education, conservation awareness, donor cultivation, may actually outweigh the genetic management considerations. Agent Reeves closed her folder. Our recommendation to the service will be that all 4 cubs remain at Redwood Conservation under Dr. Martinez's care, with the stipulation that you maintain regular reporting on their health and development, and that you participate in the species survival plan breeding recommendations when the cubs reach maturity. Elena felt tears burning in her eyes. They can stay. All of them. All of them, Agent Reeves confirmed. Then, for the first time that day, she smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed her entire face. Dr. Martinez, what you did that morning with the hyenas. I've read a lot of incident reports in my career, but I've never read anything like that. You risked your life to save those cubs and their mother. The service recognizes that level of dedication and expertise. These tigers are in good hands. After the federal team left, the staff erupted in celebration. There were tears and hugs and laughter born of relief and exhaustion. Castellanos, normally so reserved, actually opened a bottle of champagne he'd been keeping in his office for a moment worthy of celebration. To Sasha's miracle, he said, raising his glass, and to the team that made it possible. That evening, after the celebration had wound down and most of the staff had gone home, Elena walked to the tiger enclosure. The cubs were 12 weeks old now, their stripes bold and distinct, their movements increasingly coordinated. They were playing a game that looked like tag, chasing each other in circles while Sasha watched from a shaded platform. Hope, the smallest, was currently it, pursuing her larger brother Ranger with determination. She was fast, her small size an advantage in tight turns. When she finally caught him, they tumbled together in a tangle of paws and tails, their play growls audible even from where Elena stood. "We did it," Sarah said, appearing beside her. "They're really staying." "They're really staying," Elena echoed. She watched Arya climb onto Sasha's back, tiny claws gripping the tigress's fur as she tried to reach the highest point possible. Sasha tolerated this with patient grace, only shifting when Arya's claws got a bit too enthusiastic. "You know what the crazy thing is? 3 months ago, I didn't know if any of them would survive. And now I can't imagine a world without all 4 of them. They're going to do amazing things," Sarah said, "not just as ambassadors for their species, but as individuals. I can already see their personalities developing. Ranger's going to be a handful when he hits adolescence. All that boldness and confidence. Scout's going to be the problem solver. Arya's going to keep everyone on their toes with that voice of hers. And Hope. Hope's going to surprise everyone," Elena finished. "She's already proven she's a fighter." Over the next several months, the cubs continued to grow at an astonishing rate. By 6 months old, they weighed over 100 pounds each. Their playful roughhousing now powerful enough that Sasha had to intervene more frequently to prevent injuries. Their adult teeth were coming in, and their hunting instincts were emerging. They stalked birds that landed in the enclosure, pounced on moving enrichment toys, and practiced the ambush techniques that would have served them in the wild. The public remained engaged with their story. Carmen had established a Cubs Cam, a live stream of the enclosure that attracted viewers from around the world. Schools used it as an educational tool. Researchers studied the footage for behavioral insights, and the donations kept coming, ensuring that Redwood had the resources not just to care for Sasha and her cubs, but to expand other conservation programs as well. Elena published a paper on the rescue and subsequent care of the cubs in a major veterinary journal. It was cited by other professionals, used in training programs, and sparked discussions about emergency protocols for endangered species births. She was invited to speak at conferences, to consult on other difficult cases, to share the lessons learned from that desperate morning when everything had gone wrong and somehow, impossibly, turned out right. But the moment that meant the most to her came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the cubs were 8 months old. She was in the enclosure, something she did less frequently now that they were larger and more powerful, conducting a routine health check. Sasha watched from nearby, relaxed but attentive, as Elena examined Hope's teeth and gums. The young tigress sat patiently, allowing the examination with a calm trust that took Elena's breath away. When Elena finished and stepped back, Hope didn't immediately run off to rejoin her siblings. Instead, she headbutted Elena's leg gently, the same affectionate gesture Sasha had used years ago when they'd first begun building trust. It was a small moment, barely worth noting in the grand scheme of things. But to Elena, it meant everything. It meant that despite the trauma of her birth, despite the separation in those first critical days, despite all the human intervention and medical procedures and chaos, Hope knew she was safe. She knew she was loved. She knew she belonged. "You're going to be okay," Elena whispered, scratching behind the young tiger's ears. "All of you. You're going to be just fine." The cub's first birthday arrived with unseasonably warm weather and a celebration that drew visitors from across the state. Redwood Conservation had organized a public event, carefully controlled and educational, to mark the milestone and thank the community that had made their survival possible. Carmen had orchestrated the entire affair with her usual precision. There were informational booths about Amur tiger conservation, presentations by Elena and other staff members, and a silent auction to raise additional funds. Local news crews set up cameras. Children pressed against the viewing barriers, their faces bright with excitement. But the real stars of the day were Ranger, Scout, Arya, and Hope themselves. Now weighing between 250 and 300 pounds each, they were no longer the tiny, helpless creatures Elena had helped bring into the world. They were magnificent young tigers, their coats gleaming, their movements powerful and graceful. They prowled their enclosure with growing confidence, occasionally play-fighting with an intensity that made the crowd gasp. Sasha, now fully mature and in her prime, supervised from her favorite platform. She was more relaxed these days, allowing her offspring increasing independence while still maintaining her maternal authority. When Ranger got too aggressive with Hope during a wrestling match, Sasha's warning chuff was enough to make him back off immediately. Elena stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of several hundred people who had gathered. She'd given countless presentations over the past year, but this one felt different. More personal, more final, in a way, the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. "A year ago today," she began, her voice amplified by the sound system, "I got a phone call at 4:47 in the morning that changed my life." Sasha was in labor and she was surrounded by hyenas. In that moment, I didn't know if we'd be able to save her, let alone her cubs. The odds were against us in every possible way. She paused, looking toward the enclosure where the tigers lounged in the afternoon sun. But we didn't give up. Our team didn't give up. And when we asked for your help, you didn't give up either. You believed in Sasha's miracle. You made it possible for these 4 incredible animals to stay together, to grow up with their mother, to have a chance at the life they deserve. The crowd applauded, and Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion. These cubs represent more than just 4 individual tigers. They represent hope for their entire species. They represent what's possible when people choose to care, to act, to fight for something bigger than themselves. And they represent a promise that we will continue to fight for endangered species, for wild places, for a world where tigers and humans can coexist. After the presentation, Elena made her way to the staff area behind the enclosure. She needed a moment away from the crowds, a moment to process the weight of the day. She found Jake there, watching the tigers through the one-way observation glass. "Hell of a year," he said without looking away from the animals. "Hell of a year," Elena agreed. "You ever think about that morning? About how close we came to losing them?" "Every day," Elena admitted. "Every single day. Sometimes I wake up and have to remind myself that it actually worked out, that they're all still here." Jake nodded slowly. "I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen a lot of animals come and go. Some make it, some don't. That's the nature of conservation work. You do your best, but you can't save them all." He finally turned to look at her. "But these 4, they're special. Not just because of how they were born, but because of what they represent. They're proof that miracles can happen if you're willing to fight for them." Over the following months, the cubs continued their transition toward adulthood. Their play became more serious, their hunting instincts more refined. They were separated from Sasha for increasing periods, learning to be independent while still maintaining their family bonds. The expanded enclosure was completed, giving them more space to roam, climb, and explore. Ranger, true to his early personality, became the most adventurous of the 4. He was the first to investigate any new enrichment item, the first to test the boundaries of the enclosure, the first to challenge his siblings to increasingly elaborate games. He was also the largest, his muscular frame and bold demeanor marking him as a dominant personality. Scout remained the observer, the thinker. He learned by watching, studying his siblings' techniques, analyzing the patterns of the keeper's routines, figuring out how to manipulate enrichment puzzles with minimal effort and maximum efficiency. He was the one who figured out how to open the complex feeding boxes that Jake designed to challenge them. Arya lived up to her name, her vocalizations becoming more varied and expressive as she matured. She had a different sound for everything: greeting, warning, play invitation, frustration. The staff joked that she was the most talkative tiger they'd ever encountered. She was also the most social, seeking out interaction with her siblings and even with Sasha more frequently than the others. And Hope, the smallest, the fighter, the one who had come into the world not breathing, she became the most agile and graceful of the four. She could climb higher, jump farther, and move with a fluid precision that was mesmerizing to watch. She was also the most independent, comfortable spending time alone while her siblings played together. As the cubs approached 18 months old, Elena began receiving inquiries from other conservation facilities about potential breeding loans. The species survival plan coordinators were interested in the cubs' genetics, particularly Hope's, as her bloodline was underrepresented in the captive population. "It's too early to make any decisions," Elena told Castellanos during one of their regular strategy meetings. "They won't reach sexual maturity for another year at least. But we need to start thinking about the long-term plan. Do we keep all four here permanently? Do we participate in breeding loans? Do we try to establish our own breeding program? What does your gut tell you?" Castellanos asked. Elena was quiet for a moment, considering. "My gut tells me that we didn't fight this hard to keep them together just to split them up the moment they're useful for breeding. But I also know that conservation isn't about what makes us feel good. It's about what's best for the species. If loaning Hope or one of the others to another facility means contributing to genetic diversity and species survival, then that's what we should do. Even if it breaks your heart?" "Even if it breaks my heart," Elena confirmed. But that decision was still in the future. For now, the cubs were thriving, the facility was stable, and the public remained engaged with their story. David Chen continued to document their development, and Carmen used the footage to maintain awareness and support for Amur tiger conservation globally. Then, on a cold morning in late November, everything changed again. Elena was in her office reviewing lab results when Marcus burst through the door, his face pale. "We've got a situation. You need to come to Enclosure 7 right now." Elena's blood turned to ice. She was on her feet and running before Marcus finished speaking, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. An injury, an escape, an illness. After everything they'd been through, after all the battles they'd won, what could possibly be wrong now? She reached the enclosure to find Sarah and Jake already there, along with two other handlers. They were all staring at the viewing monitors with expressions of shock and concern. "What happened?" Elena demanded. Sarah pointed at one of the screens. "Watch." The footage showed the interior of the enclosure from 30 minutes earlier. The four cubs, no longer cubs really, but young adults now, were engaged in what appeared to be normal play behavior. Ranger and Scout were wrestling near the water feature. Arya was investigating a new enrichment log, and Hope was climbing one of the tall structures designed to encourage natural behaviors. Then, without warning, Hope's back legs gave out. She slipped, scrambling for purchase, and fell 15 feet to the ground below. She hit hard, rolling twice before coming to a stop. For several seconds, she didn't move. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. On the screen, Hope finally stirred, trying to stand, but her back legs wouldn't support her weight. She collapsed again, her front paws clawing at the ground as she tried to pull herself forward. "Where is she now?" Elena asked, her voice sharp with urgency. "We tranquilized her and moved her to the medical facility 10 minutes ago," Jake said. "She's stable, but Elena, something's really wrong. She can't use her back legs at all." Elena was already moving, sprinting toward the medical facility with Sarah right behind her. They found Hope on the examination table, still sedated, her breathing steady but her back legs lying at unnatural angles. Elena began her examination immediately, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the fear clawing at her chest. She checked for obvious fractures, tested reflexes, palpated the spine. Hope's front legs responded normally to stimuli, but her back legs showed no reflexes at all. No response to pain, no muscle tone. "Spinal injury," Elena said, her voice hollow. "Severe. We need x-rays and an MRI immediately. Call Dr. Voss and see if he can consult remotely. And get me Dr. Patricia Hernandez from UC Davis. She's the best veterinary neurologist on the West Coast." The next several hours were a blur of diagnostic tests and consultations. The imaging revealed the devastating truth. Hope had suffered a severe spinal injury, likely from a combination of the fall and an underlying developmental abnormality that had gone undetected. There was significant damage to her spinal cord at the lumbar region. The prognosis was grim. Dr. Hernandez appeared via video conference, reviewing the scans with a grave expression. The damage is extensive, even with surgical intervention. The likelihood of her regaining function in her hind legs is less than 10%, and surgery on a tiger this size, in this location. The risks are enormous. Infection, complications from anesthesia, post-operative care challenges, any one of those could be fatal. "What are you saying?" Elena asked, though she already knew. "I'm saying you need to consider quality of life. A tiger who can't use her back legs can't be a tiger. She can't hunt, can't climb, can't engage in natural behaviors. She'd be in constant discomfort, dependent on human care for everything, unable to interact normally with her family. For most animals in this situation, the humane choice would be euthanasia." The word hit Elena like a physical blow. Euthanasia. Putting hope down. Ending the life she'd fought so hard to save. "No," she said. "There has to be another option."